So where do we go from here? Empowered by God in love and compassion with Christ as our leader, self-sacrificially doing whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, what does that mean? This is where this talk diverges from other Christian climate change and sustainability talks. The ones I've been to so far have acted as if we haven't just gone through the facts that I just gave, just pretends as if it wasn't that bad, act as if we have plenty of time and that people aren't already dying. And they end up just talking about how to reduce plastic usage and how to do things to reduce our personal footprint. And I've been there. I've added draft excluders, all of my lights are LEDs, buy lots of bamboo stuff, don't buy much at all really. Switched to 100% green energy. I've divested, been vegan now for a year and a bit. I don't own a car. I've told work that I won't ever fly again for them. I plan to never fly again. And it's all important. As Christians, we really can't be hypocrites. We must accept that everybody can only do so much. Sometimes we just can't. But with love in our heart, we will do as much as we can. And it's all important. Maybe not pill form toothpaste to save on plastic packaging and transport, which I do. I am that person. But it actually saving lives, that's kind of pointless. Actually saving us from the ecological emergency, that's really not going to do anything. It's far too little, far too late. If it were 40 years ago when these predictions first started and we had time, that'd be great. But we don't have time left anymore. People are already dying because we have not managed to change enough and fast enough. We need governments to legally enforce systematic change that makes the cheapest thing to do, the easiest thing to do, the right thing to do. We've seen that the government can act in a crisis and enforce what is necessary. Of course, it's not going to be fun. None of this is going to be fun, but it's necessary to save lives. Not even thousands of lives, we're talking millions, probably billions of lives. And, petitions haven't worked. Leafleting hasn't worked. Letters to the MP haven't worked. I've contacted my MP about a few things, and they mainly just continue to do what their thoughts are on the matter. Lobbying hasn't worked. The amount that we can lobby compared to oil companies is pointlessly small. And it puts the power in the hands of those that have the money, which is still the few. Marches haven't worked. Even protests don't get the coverage they need. They just don't get into news for increasing public awareness and changing public demand for things. These things don't work. They feel great. I've never done any marches or protests before getting into climate action. I'm not the sort of person who stands up at every possible chance to rebel against something and is a rebel without a cause and will just look for any cause. This is not what I want to be doing with my time. If there wasn't this problem, I wouldn't be looking for another problem. But being on marches and in protests, being surrounded by other people that feel the same is great. You feel connected to people that actually have the same passion as you. It's fantastic for the people in it, but it doesn't really change anything. It doesn't get the coverage needed to actually get into the public eye and people to hear about any of this. Even people that self-proclaimed know loads about climate change issues and ecological emergency, and then listen to some of these things which are quite basic and they've never heard of them because our government's not saying anything. That's why we need to change public knowledge and to show that something is seriously up, because our government isn't speaking about it. Our media isn't really speaking about it anywhere near as much as... Obviously, from hearing what I've just been saying, you realize how bad a situation it is. General population doesn't really know that. People I speak to, I'm often so shocked at how little people know, how fine they think everything is, how many people rely that technology will save us, that it'll be fine, we don't need to think about it, it'll be fine. If we just do the things I mentioned, they're all appropriate responses for relatively small issues, but not for existential issues. Not that they shouldn't happen. We need all of these things to happen. And most of the things on the list I am involved in and do. But if that's it, then it's not going to work. The government won't act quickly enough. People will keep dying. Our children will suffer. The government is too slow, and there's too much money and pleasure and ease in beef, fossil fuels, driving, flying, and everything carbon. So historically, there are two things that need to happen to make quick, dramatic change. One is that talking about the facts that I've just spoken about and the absolutely horrific devastation needs to be part of normal conversation. It needs to become normal to ask why the government is not acting. Its public perception needs to completely change to the reality. They need to know the truth. And the government media aren't telling these things naturally. Secondly, historically, hundreds of people have to go to jail and thousands need to be arrested. Arrested because they're acting proportionately and non-violently. Violence really doesn't help any situation. Violence will make it worse, will make it just be shut down because it's violent. It must be non-violent, but act proportionately to what our society is doing to God's planet. Short of a miracle that obviously we are praying for, I'm definitely praying for. This is a proven way to make rapid change necessary for making a government realize that their policies are stupid. When they realize they don't actually want to be arresting kids and grannies for caring for the planet, for caring for the future of human civilization, for taking proportionate, non-violent action. They realize they have to change because they can't arrest everybody. So what am I actually even talking about? So going through history, to make short change requires many people making active disobedience stance that shows up the problems to be unjust. Looking at Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and the Freedom Riders movement in the US, several hundreds going to prison, several thousands being arrested. Over a single summer, that had a fundamental change in policy all over the United States that changed the bus segregation laws. Civil disobedience movement, although looking back, they seem great. At the time, they're just seen as a public nuisance. They're seen in a terrible light by all publicity. They're seen as disruptive, annoying, and just wrong. Going off the numbers of the US civil rights, in the UK, we'd need approximately 2 million people as active support, organising things, witnessing arrests, looking after the welfare of people, supporting those who are arrested, raising funds, all these things that anybody can do with whatever time they can. And probably around 500 people in jail and around 5,000 people arrested at one point. These things do make the news. These things show that a lot of people think something is seriously, seriously wrong. People don't get arrested purposefully for no reason. People don't sacrifice their lives like that for no reason. Nobody does that. That would be ridiculous. That's what makes news. That's what makes people question. That's what made me question. That's what brought this to light for me. How passionate people were about something. There must be more to what they're talking about than what I'm hearing. Otherwise, people wouldn't be doing such extreme things. It changes public's perception massively. But how does this fit with Jesus and the church? Well, when Jesus healed and spat in the dust on the Sabbath and did many other acts of disobedience against the religious authorities, points out the problems and injustice in the systems. But today's definitions, what he was doing was non-violent disobedient action. The governing authorities arrested him, put him in prison, and killed him. Some people thought he was fantastic and doing what was right and necessary. The governing bodies just thought he was trouble. The religious authorities thought he was trouble. Most people didn't understand. Most people didn't even give time to understand. Most people weren't the good soil that is open and listens. Most people don't have ears to hear. We also have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They who would not obey and bow down and worship the statue. They knew the punishment and they took it. They went into the furnace not knowing what God would do, and the other figure was with them. God used their disobedience to change the heart of the king and the laws of the nation. 3 people, like the very early church martyrs, that would not deny Jesus and give up their praise and worship to the emperor, willingly go to death in their thousands, which didn't cause the church to shrink, but instead to grow rapidly. And the emperor eventually converting to Christianity and later the Roman Catholic Church. But we look at things like Romans 13, right? About governing authorities and that God put them in place and we should submit to them. But Jesus goes against governing authorities. And what Jesus taught us to do, if the governing authorities say to do against it, then Do we stay subject to our governing authorities? We don't deny Jesus and worship other idols, just like the early church. And as it says in Romans 13, they'll put us under judgment, which they did for them, and they will for anybody doing this. So we must submit to Christ above those authorities, right? In Acts 5:29, Peter and the other apostles reply, we must obey God rather than human beings. Something I've actually genuinely wrestled with. There are genuine questions. We're trying our best to follow Jesus. We're not heathens trying to be able to get away with doing something rebellious. We're trying to know what is the right thing to do, and we'll get things wrong. But for questions like that, I've actually been on some great talks, but I'm going to get the book actually. For concise and clear wrestlings with great conclusions, I would recommend checking out this book. This is Christian Climate Action's Time to Act. Chapter 4, looking at literally that Romans 13 passage that I just spoke of. Genuinely don't do this as a rebellious act or anything without God. We must do this with him. If we're going against God, then we will fail. We must obey God rather than the human authority. So when these authorities are doing something that is killing millions, possibly billions of people, we don't stay silent, right? We do something about it. I hope this is making sense. Like I said, I'm wrestling with this myself and have been. I find myself compelled to act from what God's been doing in me, changing my heart, filling me with his compassion, to act out of that compassion for the global future generation, compelled to love my global neighbor more than allowing our government to continue to destroy God's planet. I don't want to look at my children or grandchildren in the face and say, you know what, I switched to 100% green energy. I did my bit. I don't want to have to face God and him say, what did you do with that knowledge I invested in you? And say, you know what, I hid. I did my bit, you know. I switched to 100% green energy. I got LED light bulbs. I cycled instead of driving. No, I want to stand there and him say, good and faithful servant, you did well with that I invested in you. But there's definitely a human capacity to be wrong. I can't know for sure. I know I'll be able to genuinely look Jesus in the face and say, I wasn't completely sure, but I did what I thought you wanted me to do. As much as I could understand, I did what I thought you taught me to do, living self-sacrificially and giving my life over for the good of others, seeing them and their lives as more important than my own. So what is Christian Climate Action? Christian Climate Action has been around before the youth strikes, before Extinction Rebellion. God has been moving in the hearts of his flock for a long time. He's been shining his hope of a God that isn't distant and uncaring, into the lives of activists on the front line. People on the front line of this movement are massively impressed by Christian Climate Action. These people are serious. They're open. These people have a heart for justice and will live self-sacrificially, not for their own good, not to be able to say anything, but for the good of others, genuinely. They are broken and they need his comfort. They need his salvation. It's such an incredible witness for people that are passionate about this thing and see this massive injustice, to see the church on the front line, to see so many vicars in dog collars getting shunted into the back of a police van because they will not be silent, because they have compassion, because they do genuinely live self-sacrificially and Christ-like. We've seen people come back to the Lord because they've seen the church acting like Christ that they never saw before, and that's why they turned away. We're currently seeing a generation of children, the biggest fear in their life, and the church isn't even talking about it. The biggest injustice they see in the world, and the church has nothing to say. I've been invited to talk. People are keen to hear. They're impressed by what Christian Climate Action is doing. How many times have you been invited to come and speak at something as a Christian to a non-Christian event? I'm not anything special. All I do is show them that God has the same heart. And these people are open. They chat. They listen. I think Jesus would describe them as close to the kingdom. My heart for Christian Climate Action Cambridge was to be a support network for Christians from all different churches who God has broken the heart of for this injustice. So we can mourn together and disciple each other work out how to do this. And as an outreach group, to unite and wake up Jesus' bride, to unite in doing God's will for the good of the next generations, to build up the church. Genuinely, this has been a massive growth of, I believe, becoming more sanctified, more like Him, dying to myself. This is where the rubber hits the road. These decisions of, will I choose the comfortable thing? Will I choose what I want to do because it's good and pleasurable for me? Or will I say no to a society that says more, more, more? No to a culture that says the most important thing is my own personal pleasure and fulfillment and joy? Or will I do as Jesus says when He says those that love their life will lose it, but those who give up their life for His sake will gain it for eternity? This is where the rubber hits the road. I'm tested of whether I will lay down my life, put others as more important than myself. I have the vision of a united church that acts like Jesus, acts like the Old Testament prophets, drenched in prayer, speak out against the injustice of our governments, speak out against the injustice of sacrificing children for profit, for pleasure, for comfort. Speak out for those whose future is at stake and for those who can't speak out for themselves. A united church that acts out of love for God, out of love for their global neighbors, with the mind of Christ that is on the front line of these strikes, showing those that don't yet know God that He is alive and He is active, that His heart is broken by this injustice. We have His Spirit in us, a church that is salt and light in every action and brings the presence of God with them to every protest, that is humble in the same dirt, but changes the atmosphere with peace and with love and with depth of kindness and self-sacrifice and hope that other activists just don't have. A united church that knows their incredible hope, but mourns with those who have no hope and with those who mourn about where the planet is heading, and those that only see the abyss of destruction, and is there offering His hope, His truth, His life, offering Him to those people there, right at the moment where they really need His comfort, where they really need Him. We can draw them to Him. If we're not there, we can't. If we don't genuinely care and we're not genuinely active in this, no one's going to listen. We're just proving that they're right, that the church is irrelevant. Being relevant isn't changing the music that we play. Being relevant is speaking out and acting on the most important things that are going on in the world, at the biggest injustices, being right on the front line. A vision of a church that is more self-sacrificial, more willing to lay down their liberties, luxuries, and freedoms, because we've already done so to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, to our King, our friend, our God. The next few slides are verses and quotes. And then I encourage you to stop, turn everything off, pray, talk with God, mourn with Him, let Him change your heart. Bless you.